When you get to the young adult, you have everything in graphic detail. You have the type of sex that they have in hardcore porn, only in children's books, it's all textual porn. But I don't want to be, specific here, but there isn't anything that they are not allowing into a children's book.
Folks, our little children are absolutely under assault, and it's even coming in through the children's books. It's enough to make you want to cry. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us Debbie DeGroff. She is a mother who became very concerned and read a lot of books over a period of decades, and was so alarmed by what she found that she decided to put her findings in a phenomenal book, which I have. You need to get a copy of this if you are a parent and you're concerned about the well-being of your children. It's called Between the Covers, What's Inside a Children's Book. Debbie, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for doing this. And tell us a little bit about what led up to you writing this book before we get into the content. What was it that triggered your desire to expose this stuff?
Well, I started taking my child to the library when he learned how to read, and I started bringing home all of the new books with the shiny covers that have just came into the library. And I had been a voracious reader when I was a child, and these books, there was something different about them. And so I kept reading, and over the years, I tried to tell parents, and I realized that parents really had no clue what was inside a children's book. So I just kept doing this, and Dr. Reisman told me that if I didn't write this down at some point, I was going to die with all this information in my head. So it wasn't what I set out to do, but eventually it got done. So.
Well, I'm really glad you did, Debbie. It was an eye-opening experience for me to look through your book. I mean, it's just so much incredible stuff in there. And you mentioned Dr. Reisman. She, in my view, is a superhero in terms of exposing the evildoers and trying to protect our children. So, what is in these books, Debbie, that got you so concerned? I mean, what are some of the themes, some of the subjects, some of the explicit material that got you so alarmed that you felt you needed to do this?
Well, when I first started reading these books, you understand, I was reading juvenile books to begin with. I wasn't reading the young adult, and then, of course, I branched out. When you're dealing with juvenile books, you're typically not dealing with sex. You might have a little bit of, implications, but you're not really dealing with the sex or the bad language. You don't really get that until you get to the young adult. When you get to the young adult, you have everything in graphic detail. You have the type of sex that they have in hardcore porn, only in children's books, it's all textual porn. But I don't want to be, specific here, but there isn't anything that they are not allowing into a children's book. These books are not obscure. But I don't want to stop here and make people think that it's only young adult books that you should be concerned with the sex and the profanity. Recently, I put an article on my website about shaping a child's worldview, and I hyperlinked 45 books for preschoolers that are actually read on YouTube. So you can go to my website and link on any of those books, and you can actually see the pictures, and you can listen to them being read. And you'll see that these preschoolers are dealing with activism, social justice, feminism, the gender issues, the transgender issues. It never stops. And I'm sure that your listeners understand the importance of teaching 4-year-olds how to strike and boycott and resist and change their genders, and file a lawsuit. That's very, very important for each 4-year-old.
It's so sad, and we now see the fruit of that. Parents are suddenly wondering, why are my kids out there burning down cities and throwing bricks through
Yes.
windows? Well, it's because of what they were exposed to when they were younger. And I've seen some of this too, Debbie. The amount of these filthy books that are actually mandated or even recommended by the state of Florida, for example. The Florida Citizens Alliance did a review of all the books that were being recommended for the school children here, and I mean, the stuff, you would read it and you'd feel like you're watching a hardcore pornography movie. I mean, it just makes you sick. The stuff that these poor children are being exposed to deliberately by these authors, by these publishers, by these school administrators. Um, Before we went on, I asked you, what are some of the really dangerous books, and you had a really interesting response, Debbie. So I'm going to ask you again, even though already know your answer. What are some of the especially dangerous books that parents ought to be concerned about?
Well, I'm going to try to answer that the way I answered you before. I could certainly talk to you all day personally about that, but I am a little bit reluctant to sit there and give titles on your show. I do not want children just downloading those books. It's very, very easy to do today with all the downloadable ebooks from libraries. They just, a couple seconds and it's already on their phone. For parents who really want to examine this, of course, I do deal with this in my book extensively. There is a parental warning on the front of my book. And on my website, I try to deal with a lot of these issues so that parents do know what to look for. There was one book I really, really wanted to mention on here, but I didn't want everybody to flock to buy it. If they look on my website, they'll find it. But you can go to Amazon, and they have a very lengthy excerpt from the book that would tell you everything that you wanted to know. So parents can look that way. These are mainline publishers, too.
Wow. Are there any publishers in particular, Debbie, that you've noticed that publish more filth than others? Are there any that parents really, when you see that publisher, beware?
Personally, I think they're all vying to have the top chair in that field. I mean, they're all close cousins. And something else I want to bring up is many times, you're probably an avid reader. I'm an avid reader, and there are a lot of publishers that you just recognize when you're looking at a book. Oh, that's the big publishing company. But you see all of these names you're not familiar with. But what you'll find out is they are imprints of those companies that you are familiar with. And many of those larger companies have swallowed up some of the smaller ones. So, that's one publisher seems to be just about as vile as the next one, truthfully.
Yeah, and so my next question, why don't parents know about that? Or, you would think that when they have, drag queens coming into libraries and some of them convicted sex offenders and they're rolling around with kids and they're teaching kids LGBT stuff, I mean, 2-3-year-old children, you'd think that parents might say, wait a minute here, if this is what they're doing in the library, what do the books say? Why don't parents know this stuff? Are they being irresponsible? Are they being misled? What do you think?
Well, I think most parents truly, truly care about their children. But somehow we've been conditioned, and that is what it is, to assume that books are safe or neutral if they're in the children's domain. And it's not true. And another thing is, if you're in a small community, you think, oh, I've known that librarian all my life. We grew up together. We go to church together. And that librarian cannot possibly read everything that comes into that library. Even if she chose them, she probably chose them from going by reviews from, Book List or any of these that she deems is, reliable. And so they look at those, and those reviews are a lot of times very, very misleading. And I do show one incident of that unequivocally in my book, of a review that would make a parent or a librarian think it was going to be a very positive thing for your child.
Wow, yeah, it's just so amazing, and the taxpayers are being forced to fund this kind of stuff. So on the flip side, Debbie, Um, we know there's a lot of books that we need to be aware of. We know there's a lot of, and I tell parents, you wouldn't let some stranger just randomly walk into your living room and start talking to your child. So, why would you just give some book written by a random stranger to your child that you haven't vetted? But is there any way for parents to kind of know what books are safe? Is there like a list that you recommend of books that have been around for a long time that we know are wholesome? And more broadly, how can parents who are concerned about these things, how can they protect their children?
That's a very good question that I get asked a lot. And no, I deal with in chapter 4 of my book why I do not make a list. There are a lot of parents who think that if it doesn't have profanity or sex, then therefore it's in the good category. So if it's Marxist, very anti-capitalistic, anti-Christian, and everything else, occultic, violent, does that make it still a good book? Everybody has a different criteria. So what I suggest is, number one, if you have very young children, you could go to the library for 2 hours today. These books for young children are picture books. There's only a few hundred words, if that, in a lot of these books. Spend 2 hours, go through 20, 25 of the books. Maybe you'll find one that you like. Put it on your list or buy the book. If you're going to have multiple children, then you have that one book for your library. And maybe you have friends that are kind of like-minded and they could suggest a book. I would still suggest that you read it on your own and make your own decision. I just read a book that's about voting, and some of it's fairly balanced. Okay, Norman Lear, of course, did the foreword and was behind it, if that tells you anything. But there was a quote in there from Maroon 5. I had to look that up to find out it was a pop rock band. Okay, yeah. But there was 5 members. And on there, I want to see if I can find the quote for you. He wrote about capitalism. And he said in there that capitalism never works. Okay, here it is. Capitalism simply does not work, at least not in the best interests of the many. The Great Depression proved this, and the lesson learned from the economic recovery of the 40s and 50s is that capitalism can only be maintained by constant war and confusion. Okay. What did they omit? If capitalism was the worst thing that ever set foot on this planet, and we eliminated capitalism, does it say what they're going to replace it with? There's so much omitted, but we have to remember when you're reading these children's books, it's a child reading these books, and a child has limited information. They don't know what you know about Marxism or capitalism or anything in between. So I encourage parents, when you are reading books, don't read it from your age group. Try to look at it through the lens of a child. And what are they going to end up with? What's going to be their takeaway? And lastly, I would like to say that if you look when some of these books were published, they were published maybe 15, 20 years ago. The children that read those books are adults now. They're possibly your leaders in your community. And we often wonder, where did they pick up an idea like this? And homeschoolers aren't off the bat. Homeschoolers typically read more than their public school counterparts. And many homeschool parents, considering that that the libraries are neutral and safe, they turn them loose in there without giving it a thought, and then wonder where they got the ideas that they did.
That's so true, Debbie, and it's so important. As a general rule, what I've found, I've got lots of children of lots of different ages, and what I've found is that the further back the book was published, generally the better it is. So, I prefer 1920s to 1990s in terms of, wholesome content and all that. And another trend that I've noticed, and I didn't ask you about this before, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on it, is the rise of kind of occultism and witchcraft, and just it seems like it's just the kids are being bombarded with it. It's coming through the television, it's coming through the books, and they've got sorcerers, and they're supposed to be so cool, and it's just they're good sorcerers. They're not the bad kind of sorcerers, and the witches, they're the good kind of witches. Have you noticed this dramatic rise in occultism? Do you think it's coordinated, and do you see a risk to the well-being of say Christian children from being just bombarded with this kind of propaganda?
Well, I've seen this for a lot of years, and probably I shouldn't maybe bring this up on a program, but I ran into this from a Christian publisher of children's books. And it was almost every book I found from them and during those particular years were satanic and witchcraft. It's not a matter of it being resolved at the end. I was so upset, I called my friend who had a Christian bookstore, and I said, are these people a Christian publisher, or is this just a subsidiary, And, and unfortunately, you have to watch. You just can't blindly trust. And the other thing that I thought of, you have young children too. Usually when you have young children, there's so much expenses to raising children and the latest doctor visit or whatever. You don't have money to go buy hardback books that take 20 minutes to read for your children.
Right.
It was grandparents buying these books. If you think about it, they were buying these books thinking they were doing a good thing for their children in Christian bookstores. This is sad. So I'm just telling parents, please don't have a blind trust. Look for yourself.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Debbie. Just in recent weeks and months, I've been in communication with Don Vino. He leads a phenomenal ministry out in the Midwest. And one of the things he brought to my attention was just this invasion into Christian homeschooling resources of this thing called the Enneagram, which is, this occult thing. That's, I mean, it's just, and parents, they buy Christian books from a Christian publisher at a Christian bookstore, and there's just an implicit trust. There's an assumption that it's going to be, at the very least, not occult, at the very least, not, overtly harmful to their children. And unfortunately, that's not a safe assumption anymore. Parents, you have got to be aware that the enemy is coming at your children every which way, and it's even coming through Christian publishers. Debbie, I can't thank you enough for all the work you've done. Please tell viewers, where can they go and get the book? I know the ebook or the what do you call it, the Kindle is available through Amazon, but if they want the hardcover, which I highly recommend that parents get, they can get it from your website, Debbie. So please tell us your website, and then also any final thoughts, remarks, or any ideas on what parents can do if they share these concerns.
Okay, first of all, my website is what'sinsidechildrensbooks.com, all lowercase, no apostrophes. And there is the only place where you can purchase the hard copy of my book. It's 8.5 by 11. It's more of a reference text, actually. And you can mark it up, anything that you need to do with that to help you in the future. I made the Kindle available because there were a lot of people from Canada, and at the time it was $17.25 to ship a book. So it was more conducive for foreign countries to do the Kindle. So I just encourage parents, if they would just go to my site. Don't take my word for any article they're reading. Take one of those books and say, oh, she's got to be kidding. And go get that book and read it for yourself, and you're going to understand that the problem is worse than we ever thought that it was. And if one book from a children's publishing division has over 1,300 F words in it, I discuss that on my site. If one book can have that, and one book can have the type of deviancies that it does, then any child's book can. Do you know which one does and which one doesn't? That's the question.
Oh, yeah. Debbie, there's so much to process, but again, thank you so much for your efforts to highlight this enormous problem. Parents, you heard what Debbie had to say. It's your job to protect your children, and if you don't protect your children, nobody else is going to do it for you, okay? Your pastor's not going to do it for you. Your school is not going to do it for you. It falls on you. That responsibility is on you. So if you don't want your children to being exposed to perversion and occultism and witchcraft and cuss words and brutal violence, you've got to take an active role. Get a copy of Debbie's book. Share this information with other people. people, folks. Your average parent out there, even your average Christian parent out there, does not understand the relentless assault that is coming against our children. So, folks, don't just ignore this message. Don't let it go in one ear and out the other. Like this video, share, subscribe, get this information out to others. Go to Debbie's website and make sure you are playing a very, very active role in protecting your children from this evil. Thanks again for watching. Thank you, Debbie, once again for being with us. God bless you all. And until next time, I'm Alex Newman with The New American. Take good care.